The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest were holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't resemble any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment there had been a clear path. Now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, alone, in the fog. Okay, I muttered, you've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together. The undergrowth was denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey!" I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Kevin, and grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees, thick, twisted trees that looked like they'd grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct, voices calling out from the mist. "Nate." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Kevin. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." The forest. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside. Water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. A chill ran down my spine. How had it gotten there? Kevin was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Kevin was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen. Shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. Back home, I reviewed the footage. Kevin wasn't in it. It was like he had never existed. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. There's something oddly liberating about running a plumbing business in a place as remote as the little town of Bethel, Alaska. Maybe it's the raw beauty of the place or the tight-knit community where everybody knows everybody else's business. But whatever it is, it's been good to me. I'm Helen Lewis, and after serving 12 years in the military, I decided that crawling through the icy crawl spaces of Alaskan homes, fixing frozen pipes, was a better way to spend my life than dodging bullets in some godforsaken desert. I like the solitude out here, away from the noise of the world. That is, until the government called me back to deal with something I never expected. It all started with a phone call from an old buddy of mine, Richard Scott, who now works for a secretive branch of the U.S. a government that deals with things the public is better off not knowing about. Cryptids, they call them, creatures out of myth and nightmare. "Hey, Eli, we've got a situation up north, and you're the man for the job," he said. The last time I heard from Richard, we were running ops in Afghanistan, so I knew this was serious. When I landed in Anchorage, Richard was waiting for me at the airport with a thick folder. "You're going to want to read this on the way," he said, his face grim. The dossier was filled with reports of missing hikers, strange sightings, and photos of mauled bodies. The victims' remains were torn apart in ways no known animal could manage. "You're thinking bear?" I asked, though I knew that wasn't the case. "Not a chance. Whatever this is, it's bigger and smarter, and it's hunting humans." We flew by chopper to a small, nondescript base near the town of Talna. The base was nothing more than a cluster of gray buildings surrounded by high fences and camouflaged to blend into the dense forest. Inside, I met the team, 4 other men and women, all seasoned hunters and soldiers. They didn't introduce themselves beyond first names. I guess when you hunt monsters, anonymity becomes second nature. We spent the next few hours going over the mission. The creature, whatever it was, had been spotted near Denali National Park, moving through the trees like a shadow. Locals whispered about an ancient beast, something they called the Lord of the Forest, though no one could agree on what exactly it was. Some said it was a wolf the size of a grizzly. Others claimed it was a man who turned into a beast. The park rangers were terrified, keeping people out of the area as best they could, but the disappearances continued. The plan was simple. Track the creature, engage, and eliminate it. We'd be dropped into the forest by helicopter and work our way through the last known location of the attacks. I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, but as we geared up for the mission, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something way over our heads. We set out at dawn, the forest around us cloaked in a thick fog that turned everything into a hazy blur. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you something is watching, waiting for you to make the first move. Our lead tracker, a wiry guy named Wes, signaled us to stop. He knelt down inspecting the ground, and when he stood up, his face was pale. Tracks, but not like any I've seen before. They're too large for a bear, too deep for a wolf. We followed the tracks deeper into the forest, moving slowly, weapons at the ready. The deeper we went, the stronger the sense of dread became. The trees around us seemed to close in, their branches reaching out like claws. And then we found the first body. It was one of the missing hikers, or what was left of him. The torso was mangled, torn open as if something had tried to eat him from the inside out. Blood had soaked into the ground, and the air was thick with the smell of death. But there were no scavengers, no sign of the usual wildlife that would pick a corpse clean. Whatever had done this was something they wanted no part of. "Jesus," muttered Kate, the only woman on our team, as she scanned the area. "What the hell are we dealing with?" Before anyone could answer, there was a rustle in the underbrush, followed by a low, rumbling sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We raised our weapons, forming a tight circle, eyes scanning the forest. That's when it hit us. The creature was fast, too fast for us to react in time. It barreled into Wes, dragging him into the trees before we could fire a shot. His screams echoed through the forest, cut off abruptly. We moved as one, pursuing the sound, but it was like chasing smoke. By the time we reached the spot where Wes had been taken, all that was left was a bloody smear on the ground. "We need to fall back," said Jake, our team leader. "Regroup. Get air support." But before we could move, the creature was on us again. It moved like a blur, a massive shape that defied clear vision, its body blending with the shadows. Kate fired a burst from her rifle, and for a moment, I thought I saw it. A hulking form covered in coarse, matted fur, with a head like a wolf, but larger, more savage. It lunged at Kate, claws flashing. She screamed, her rifle flying out of her hands as the beast tore into her. Jake and I opened fire, the shots deafening in the stillness, but the creature shrugged off the bullets as if they were nothing. It tossed Kate aside like a rag doll and turned its attention to us. Jake threw a grenade, and the explosion rocked the forest, sending debris flying. When the smoke cleared, the creature was gone, but so was Jake. I was alone. Heart pounding, I stumbled back through the trees trying to keep my bearings. The fog was thicker now, turning the forest into a maze. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound was the creature stalking me. I knew I couldn't stop moving, couldn't let it get the drop on me like it had the others. I heard a growl, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scanned the darkness, trying to find a way out. But the forest had changed. It was as if the trees themselves were shifting, trapping me within. And then, in a small clearing, I saw it. The creature stood on two legs, towering over me, its fur matted with blood. Its eyes were dark, empty voids, and its mouth was filled with teeth like a shark, rows upon rows of serrated edges that could tear through flesh and bone with ease. It was a nightmare given form, an ancient terror that defied logic and reason. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then it charged. I fired my rifle, but it barely slowed the beast down. It was on me in seconds, claws slashing through the air. I dove to the side, feeling its breath on my neck as it missed me by inches. I scrambled to my feet, pulling out my knife as the creature circled me, growling low in its throat. This was it. My last stand. As the creature lunged, I thrust the knife upward, catching it in the throat. The blade sank deep, and the beast let out a roar of pain, staggering back. Black, thick blood sprayed from the wound, splattering the ground. But it didn't go down. Instead, it came at me with renewed fury. It was pure instinct that saved me. I rolled to the side, grabbed a fallen branch, and swung it with all my might. The wood connected with the creature's head, and for the first time, it stumbled. I didn't hesitate. I drove the knife into its chest, twisting the blade as deep as it would go. The creature let out a final guttural howl, and then it collapsed. I stood there, panting, covered in blood. Some of it mine, most of it the creature's. The forest was silent again. The mission was classified. The deaths were blamed on a rogue bear. But those who saw the body of the creature that night knew the truth, and I stayed far away from the forest ever since. I never thought much of my job, honestly. Sure, it's not exactly your everyday gig, but somebody's got to do it, right? I'm George Hill, one of the government's best-kept secrets. They call us the Cryptid Containment Unit, a fancy title for what we really do, hunt monsters that people don't even know exist. Most folks think we're a bunch of crackpots, but they wouldn't if they knew what we face out there. My life's never been what you'd call normal, but hell, what is normal anyway? My last mission took me to the deep woods of northern Maine, remote, quiet, a place where people disappear without a trace. That's what happened to a small research team stationed near Moosehead Lake. They were there to study something mundane, moose migration patterns or some other nonsense, but they found something else instead. The last transmission we got from them was nothing but garbled static and a single word, beast. When I arrived at the site, I immediately knew something was off. The air was too still, too quiet, even for a place as secluded as this. The camp was deserted, tents ripped apart like paper, blood spattered everywhere. Not a single body was in sight, just the chilling evidence of a violent end. I've seen this kind of thing before, and it never ends well. I've been doing this job long enough to know when something's hunting you. That feeling started creeping up my spine, a sense of being watched, stalked, even though I hadn't seen a single living thing since I got here. But there was something in the air, a smell, almost faint, like sulfur and rot mixed with the musk of damp earth. I knew then I was dealing with something old, something that didn't belong in our world. I found a trail of blood leading deeper into the forest, and like an idiot, I followed it. Maybe that's why people like me don't live long enough to retire. We're too stubborn to quit when the job gets ugly. The trail led to a cave hidden in the dense brush, a gaping mouth of darkness that seemed to swallow the last light of day. I switched on my flashlight, checked my weapon, a modified M4 carbine designed to take down things that laugh at regular bullets, and stepped inside. The stench hit me first, stronger now, almost overwhelming. I could taste it on my tongue, bitter and metallic. I moved deeper into the cave, my boots crunching on bones, both human and animal. The walls were covered in markings, symbols I couldn't understand, but their meaning was clear. This place was a lair, and whatever lived here wasn't human. Then I heard it, a sound that wasn't an echo, something moving in the darkness ahead. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls, and then I saw it. A massive, hulking shape crouched over something, gnawing on what I assumed were the remains of one of the researchers. It was hard to make out details in the flickering light, but I could see enough to know this thing wasn't from around here. It was covered in thick, matted fur, almost like a bear, but with twisted limbs that ended in claws the size of my forearm. Its head was like that of a wolf, but stretched and wrong, with a jaw that seemed to open far wider than it should. The eyes, no, not the eyes. Don't think about the eyes. It didn't take long for the thing to notice me. It turned, letting out a snarl that reverberated through the cave. I didn't wait for it to make the first move. I unloaded half a clip into its chest, each bullet hitting with a sickening thud. The thing staggered but didn't go down. Instead, it roared, and the force of it nearly knocked me off my feet. I backed up, switching tactics. I had a few specialized rounds designed for things tougher than any normal beast. I reloaded, aiming for the creature's head. But it was fast, faster than anything that big should be. It lunged at me, and I barely managed to dive out of the way. Its claws scraped across my armor, leaving deep gouges in the Kevlar. I fired again, this time hitting it square between the eyes. The creature howled and dropped to the ground, twitching. I didn't take any chances, though. I fired again, right into its heart. The twitching stopped, and the beast lay still. I took a moment to catch my breath, leaning against the wall of the cave. My hands were shaking, but that was normal after a fight like this. I approached the creature carefully, nudging it with my boot to make sure it was really dead. Satisfied, I knelt down to get a better look at it. Up close, it was even worse. Its fur was matted with dried blood, not just from its kills, but from its own body, as if it had been wounded before and healed over time. Scars crisscrossed its thick hide. Its mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth, some broken and rotting, but still lethal. The worst part was the claws. Each one was like a curved blade designed to rip and tear, and judging by the state of the cave, they'd been put to good use. I shuddered to think what would have happened if this thing had made it out of the woods and into a populated area. I took a few photos, standard procedure, then pulled out a small vial of holy water. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but you'd be surprised how many of these things react to it. I sprinkled it on the beast's body, watching for any signs of movement, any last-minute surprises. But it stayed still, and the water just sizzled harmlessly on its fur. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't supernatural, just a freak of nature, albeit a deadly one. I was about to head back when I heard something behind me, a soft, wet sound like something sliding over the rocks. I spun around, weapon raised. Nothing, just the darkness of the cave. My nerves were shot. That was all. The adrenaline was wearing off and exhaustion was creeping in. I made my way out of the cave, dragging the creature's carcass with me. It was heavy, but I wasn't leaving it behind. The world needed to see what was out here, what was hiding in the shadows of our so-called civilization. When I got back to the camp, it was still eerily silent. No sign of life, just the remnants of the research team's last stand. I loaded the creature onto the back of my truck, securing it with chains. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something slinking through the trees, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I floored the gas pedal, leaving the camp, and whatever else was out there, behind. Back at the base, they were waiting for me. The usual suits and scientists, eager to dissect the latest find. I didn't say much, just handed over the evidence and left them to it. My job was done, and I was ready to put this one behind me. But as I drove away from the base, heading back to my cabin in the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that there were more of those things out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble into their territory. I've dealt with plenty of monsters in my time, but this one felt different, like it was just the tip of the iceberg. I don't know what's out there, but I know it's something we're not ready for. And when it comes, I'll be there. Because that's what I do. I hunt monsters, and I make sure they never get the chance to hunt us. The last thing I did before heading inside was check my weapon, make sure it was loaded, because out here, you never know what's going to come knocking. And I'm not about to be caught off guard. Not again. My name is Gary Scott, but most people call me Danny. I was 40 when I drove my RV deep into the heart of Withloochee State Forest looking for solitude. What I found instead was something I can't explain, something that should never exist. I had been a firefighter for nearly 20 years before I quit, not by choice. My last call had ended in tragedy, a house fire that took my partner's life. I got out. He didn't. Survivor's guilt? They called it. I just called it a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. So I decided to disappear for a while, park my RV somewhere off-grid where no one could find me. Not my ex-wife, not my old station buddies, not the therapist who kept insisting I process my grief. I wasn't interested in healing, I just wanted silence. But silence wasn't what I found. The first night, I woke to a scream. Not just any scream, a sound so sharp, so full of pain that it sliced through my skull like a damn ice pick. It sounded like a woman, but not exactly. There was something wrong about it, too shrill, too stretched, too long. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside, my fire had burned low. The woods beyond my RV were pitch black, too still. The sound had stopped, but the ringing in my ears remained. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a panther, maybe a fox. I knew better, but I forced myself to believe it. Then I heard footsteps, slow, circling the RV. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, aiming it out the window. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw something strange. A few feet from my fire pit, the dirt was disturbed, like something had been standing there for hours, watching. I shook it off, blaming my own paranoia, and spent the day hiking. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, just that thick, dead air pressing against my ears. Then I nearly tripped over it, a burned-out structure, small, almost like a shack. It wasn't on any maps I'd checked before coming here. It looked old but not ancient, maybe a couple of decades, judging by the way the wood had blackened and split. I stepped closer, kicking at the ashes. That's when I saw the names, carved into the charred floorboards, scratched deep into the wood, like someone had done it with their bare nails. Some were worn away by time, but others, I froze. One of them was mine, Gary Scott. I stepped back fast, my pulse hammering. I'd never been here before. No one knew I was here. And yet there it was, my name burned into the bones of this ruined place. Something rustled behind me. I turned too fast, nearly falling. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the trees. Nothing. But then, through the dense undergrowth, I saw it. A figure, watching me. It was only there for a second, just a flicker of movement before it melted into the shadows. But my gut twisted at the shape of it, the way it stood, the way it leaned just a little too far forward, like it was waiting for me to speak first. I didn't. I ran. I got back to my RV at dusk, out of breath, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. But when I reached for my keys, they weren't there. I tore the place apart, searching the countertops, the drawers, my backpack. Nothing, like they had just disappeared. Then the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even turned it on. But now it was hissing with static, cutting in and out like a half-tuned station. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The noise sharpened. Mercer. I stopped breathing. Help me. A woman's voice, ragged, full of pain, distant, like she was speaking through a tunnel that stretched beyond time. Then the screaming started. It blasted through the radio at a deafening pitch, so loud and shrill that I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. It was inside me, rattling my skull, vibrating through my teeth like my bones were coming apart. My nose started bleeding. I reached up and ripped the radio out of the dashboard. Silence. My whole body shook as I stared at the radio in my hands. My ears were still ringing. My skin felt raw. I was leaving. Right now. I grabbed my emergency bag and a flashlight and bolted outside. I didn't care about the RV anymore. I'd hike out to the road, flag down a car, whatever it took. But the second my boots hit the dirt, I froze. Because standing at the tree line, illuminated by the last sliver of dying daylight, was her, blackened skin sloughing from her face, eyes, hollow pits of darkness. She screamed. My flashlight exploded in my hand. The sound sent me crashing to the ground, gasping for air. My lungs felt like they were on fire. My vision went white. When I could finally see again, she was gone. I don't know how long I lay there. When I finally pulled myself up, my whole body was trembling. I turned toward the road, forcing my legs to move. But no matter how far I walked, I always ended up back at the burned clearing. Like the forest had twisted itself around me, like I'd never left. A part of me knew then, knew that I wasn't getting out of here. The woods whispered my name, and then I saw myself. Standing at the edge of the clearing near the wreckage of the burned shack, my own face, my own eyes, but wrong. The copy of me smiled, not a normal smile, too wide, too sharp, like the skin was splitting just to stretch the mouth that far. I took a step back. The other Danny didn't move. Instead, he lifted his hand and pointed. I turned, and the burned woman was standing right behind me. Her mouth opened. I never heard the final scream. I just remember the fire, the heat swallowing me whole, the crackling of my own flesh peeling away, the sound of my own voice joining hers, burning in agony, and nothing. Days later, a ranger found my RV, burned down to the frame, no body inside, just my name carved into the trees, and the radio still playing, a soft, distant scream. My name's Patrick Harris, and this all went down back in 2010, around April, in the remote forest near Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I was on a solo RV camping trip, something I'd been doing since I was a kid. These trips are my thing. There's nothing like it. Just you, your thoughts, and a beautiful, brutal stretch of nature. I'd driven my old 2004 Winnebago through the small Alaskan towns until they trickled down to dirt roads, and soon enough, it was only me and the vast, snowy emptiness. People in the last town I stopped by gave me all kinds of odd looks when I told them where I was heading. The forest was dense, lonely, a whole different beast from any place I'd camped before. But hey, I was ready for it, or so I thought. The air was crisp, and a heavy silence blanketed the area as I parked near a frozen stream. I could hear the occasional crackle of ice shifting in the distance. I set up camp, cracked open a beer, and sat by the small fire I'd managed to get going, listening to the eerie quiet that settles in the woods at night. Sometime around midnight, I was starting to doze off by the fire when I heard footsteps in the snow, way too close for comfort. I sat up fast, scanning the trees, figuring it was maybe an animal, a moose or bear, but nothing showed, just the occasional crunch of snow somewhere out there. "Who's there?" I called out, knowing it was pointless. I laughed to myself, shrugged it off, and eventually crawled back into the RV, locking the door more out of habit than fear. The quiet returned, but sleep wouldn't come easy after that. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a loud banging on the RV door, something aggressive and desperate. My heart pounded as I reached for my flashlight. "Who's there?" I called out again, but whoever it was just kept banging. I stayed silent, waiting. The banging stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by the faint crunching of footsteps circling the RV. Then, in the dead of night, I heard a low voice right outside my window, like someone muttering to themselves but too faint to make out words. I froze. Whoever was out there was right up against the RV. I stayed perfectly still, listening to the muttering, realizing it wasn't just rambling, it sounded like they were counting. Slowly, as if keeping track of time, each number spaced out, the voice steady. When the muttering finally stopped, I waited, hoping it was over. Then I heard what I can only describe as a chuckle, like they'd thought of some kind of joke just for themselves. Something felt off, wrong on a level I'd never felt before. I waited until dawn to step out, gripping a fire poker I'd brought for roasting marshmallows, the closest thing I had to a weapon. There were tracks in the snow around the RV, deep, erratic paths that looped around multiple times. Whoever had been out there was barefoot. That sent a chill through me that I couldn't shake. I scanned the area, finding nothing but more footprints that faded into the trees. Shaken, I got back in the RV and decided I'd drive to the closest ranger station, a good 30 miles out. But the minute I tried to turn the ignition, I knew something was wrong. The RV wouldn't start. Not even a click. I popped the hood, and what I found made my stomach drop. The wires had been cut, clean, neat, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing had been at work. I backed away, scanning the trees, wondering if they were still out there. Hiding. Waiting. I almost laughed at myself for even thinking it, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I packed up what I could fit in my backpack and started walking, hoping to reach the ranger station by noon. 30 miles was no joke, but I was more afraid of staying put than of the hike ahead. I'd been walking for about an hour when I started hearing that counting again. Somewhere behind me, my mind raced. I forced myself not to turn around, kept my pace steady, hoping it was just my imagination, but it got louder, closer. It was him, the same low, steady voice, counting. This time I could hear his footsteps too. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Keeping time with the numbers. I finally turned, expecting to see some wild-eyed man charging after me. But there was no one there, just endless trees. The path behind me was quiet again. I kept moving, faster this time, scanning the forest every few steps, straining to hear if he had followed me. But there was nothing. Just the occasional snap of a branch, which could have been anything. The strangest part? As I kept moving, I started finding things in my path. Little objects in the snow that hadn't been there before. A single glove, a rusted hunting knife, a small plastic bag with something in it, like a clump of dark hair or animal fur. It felt like someone was leaving a trail, leading somewhere. I ignored it, refused to touch anything. But the feeling that I was being played with gnawed at me. Another hour passed. I didn't hear the counting again, but the paranoia was eating at me. Every shadow seemed like him. Every sound an echo of his footsteps. I kept a grip on that fire poker, feeling ridiculous, but too scared to let go. The path started to slope uphill, and I figured I was getting closer to the ranger station. Then I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A makeshift campsite just off the trail. An old, ratty tent pitched in a clearing. My skin crawled at the sight of it. There were empty cans, scraps of food, and scattered belongings. It looked like someone had been living out there a while, hidden in the trees. But the worst part? What was hanging from the branches around the campsite? Bones. Strung up with bits of cloth dangling like some kind of twisted wind chime. I stepped back, stomach churning. Some of the bones looked human, small, like they could have been from a child. I heard a twig snap behind me and whipped around, poker raised ready to swing. There he was, a lanky man with tangled hair and a wild look, his clothes nothing more than rags. He grinned at me, showing teeth that looked like they hadn't seen a toothbrush in years. "Well, look who wandered into my neck of the woods," he drawled, his voice like gravel. I took a step back, keeping the poker between us. "Did you mess with my RV?" I demanded, keeping my voice steady. He laughed, a low, mean sound. Maybe I did. You sure got a pretty setup there. Looked too easy not to mess with." "Why?" I asked, my heart hammering. He cocked his head as if the question surprised him. "Why not?" Then he lunged. Fast. Faster than I expected. I swung the poker, connecting with his shoulder, but he barely flinched. He shoved me hard and I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the ice. He was on me in a second, hands reaching for my throat. I kicked out, catching him in the knee. He let out a grunt, just enough for me to scramble to my feet. I ran, ducking between trees, not daring to look back. Then, a gunshot. Loud. Echoing through the forest. The man froze, eyes wide, and stumbled back, clutching his arm, bleeding. A ranger stepped out from the trees, rifle raised, eyes cold. "You all right?" he asked. I barely nodded. The man backed away, then bolted into the trees. Gone. The ranger drove me back to town. Turns out they'd been tracking that man for years. An old prospector, they said, gone rogue after his family died. Some folks claimed he'd gone mad from the isolation living out there, luring in unsuspecting campers. For fun. My name is Stephen Adams, and what I'm about to share happened back in 1996. I was a Navy SEAL, and we were deployed on a secret mission in the dense forests of Oregon, not far from the small town of Tillamook. We were there to investigate a series of bizarre disappearances that had local authorities stumped. Being in the military, we didn't get all the details, just enough to know that something weird was, and it was our job to figure it out. We arrived in Tillamook under the cover of night. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the town itself seemed cloaked in an unsettling quiet. My team consisted of 5 men: Lieutenant Jake Mortensen, our commanding officer, Frank Sullivan, a communications expert, Victor Reyes, our medic, and Thomas "Tommy" Delgado, a demolition specialist. All solid guys, men I had trusted with my life on more than one occasion. Our contact was a local sheriff named Ryan Clark. He briefed us quickly, his voice tense. "There have been over a dozen disappearances in the last 6 months," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "No bodies, no signs of struggle, people just vanish." We set up our base in an old abandoned ranger station deep in the woods. It was a 2-story structure, creaky and dilapidated but serviceable. The first few days were uneventful. We patrolled the woods theft, using all our training to navigate the dense underbrush and towering trees, but we found nothing out of the ordinary. Then on the 4th night, things started to change. We were sitting around the old wooden table in the ranger station, eating MREs and sharing stories, when we heard it. A scream, sharp and piercing, cutting through the stillness of the night. We bolted outside, weapons at the ready, but the forest around us was eerily silent. "Sounded like a woman," Tommy said, scanning the darkness with his flashlight. "Stay alert," Mortensen ordered. "We're not alone out here." We didn't find anything that night, but the scream lingered in our minds. The next day, we split into pairs to cover more ground. Mortensen and I took the northern sector, while the others spread out to the east and west. We trudged through the forest, the undergrowth thick and unyielding, moving in silence, our senses on high alert. After a few hours, we came across an old cabin, half hidden by moss and vines. It looked abandoned, but we decided to check it out. The inside was musty and dark, filled with broken furniture and decaying debris. As we cleared each room, we found nothing but dust and shadows, until Mortensen called out, "Stephen, over here." In the corner of what seemed to be the living room was a trap door. It was partially hidden under a rotting rug, and judging by the dust around it, it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. We pried it open and were met with a set of rickety wooden stairs leading down into darkness. "Stay sharp," Mortensen whispered, and we descended into the unknown. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with mildew. We swept the room with our flashlights and saw that it was filled with old crates and boxes. But in the far corner, there was something that made my blood run cold: an altar. It was crude, made of stone and wood, with strange symbols carved into it. Around it were scattered bones, some animal, but others disturbingly human. "This isn't good," Mortensen muttered. "We need to get the others." We hurried back to the ranger station and relayed what we'd found. The atmosphere grew tense as we discussed our next move. Reyes suggested we wait until morning to investigate further, but Mortensen was adamant. "Whatever's happening, it's happening now. We need to fast." We decided to head back to the cabin, this time with the whole team. It was getting dark, and the forest seemed to close in around us as we made our way back. The cabin looked even more ominous in the fading light, its shadow stretching out like a dark stain. Inside, we descended the stairs again, our flashlights piercing the gloom. We spread out, examining the altar and the surrounding area. Tommy was the first to notice it, a small hidden compartment under the altar. He pried it open, revealing a journal, its pages yellowed with age. As we leafed through it, we realized it was a detailed account of rituals and sacrifices, written in a mix of English and some older, unrecognizable language. The last entry was particularly chilling. It spoke of summoning something, a creature that dwelled in the forest, hungry for human souls. "Guys, we need to leave," I said, a sense of urgency creeping into my voice, but it was too late. From above, we heard a noise, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. We rushed up the stairs, weapons ready, but what we saw froze us in our tracks. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall and gaunt, with pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to suck in the light. It moved with an unnatural grace, stepping into the cabin without a sound. "Back away slowly," Mortensen ordered. But the thing was faster. It lunged at Reyes, its hand a blur. We opened fire, the sound of gunshots deafening in the confined space. The creature staggered but didn't fall. It slashed at Reyes, who screamed in agony as he went down, blood gushing from a wound in his side. "Fall back," I yelled, dragging Reyes toward the stairs. We retreated, firing as we went, but the thing was relentless. We barely made it out of the cabin, with Mortensen and Tommy covering our escape. Once outside, we regrouped, panting and shaking. Reyes was in bad shape, and we knew we had to get him medical attention fast. But as we started to move, we heard more noises, rustling in the underbrush, shadows flitting between the trees. "We need to get back to the ranger station," Mortensen said, his voice grim. We half ran, half carried Reyes through the forest, the darkness pressing in around us. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, more distinct. We fired blindly into the trees, trying to keep whatever was following us at bay. By the time we reached the ranger station, we were exhausted and terrified. We barricaded the doors and windows, setting up a defensive perimeter. Reyes was fading fast, his breathing shallow. Tommy did his best to patch him up, but we all knew it was a losing battle. As the night wore on, the sounds outside grew louder, more insistent. We could hear them, the creatures moving around the building, scratching at the walls, trying to get in. "This can't be happening," Frank muttered, his face pale. "What the hell are those things?" "Doesn't matter," Mortensen said, his jaw set. "We hold the line. We survive till morning." But dawn seemed an eternity away. Just before sunrise, there was a final assault. The creatures attacked with renewed ferocity, breaking through the barricades. We fought them off, but it was chaos. In the melee, Mortensen went down, one of the creatures tearing into him with savage fury. Frank and I managed to drag his body inside, but he was gone. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the creatures had retreated, leaving us battered and broken. Reyes was dead. Mortensen, too. Only Tommy, Frank, and I were left, and we were barely hanging on. We made our way back to Tillamook, each step a struggle. The townspeople stared at us, their faces a mix of horror and pity. Sheriff Dobbins met us, his expression grim. "What happened?" he asked. I told him everything, sparing no details. He listened in silence, then nodded. "I'll take care of it. You boys did your best." In the aftermath, there were no answers. The disappearances stopped, but the town was left with an unspoken fear. Even now, years later, I can't forget the eyes of that creature, the emptiness that seemed to swallow everything. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the rustle of leaves and wonder if one day it will come for me too.
My name is Dylan Gonzalez, and this went down back in 2020, right out in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. I thought I'd found the perfect campsite. Middle of nowhere, just me and my RV, with a fridge stocked with beer. I'm a simple guy, so this was paradise. No one bugging me, no deadlines, no cell service. Just the open forest and a sky full of stars. I parked near a patch of trees beside a thin creek, planning to spend the weekend doing absolutely nothing. Not that I was unfamiliar with camping. I'd been doing these solo trips for years. But never quite this deep in the woods, and definitely never with the kind of trouble that was about to hit me. Around dusk on the first night, I was roasting hot dogs over the campfire when I heard some rustling just beyond the trees. My immediate thought was bear, so I didn't move a muscle. Figured if I sat tight, it would lose interest. The rustling stopped, and I convinced myself it was a raccoon or something harmless. I went to bed in my RV, locked the doors, and that was that. The next morning I stepped out to stretch, and there about 30 feet from my RV was this torn-up bag. Trash was scattered everywhere. It wasn't mine, though. I always keep things tidy and secure. This was someone else's trash, and it looked old. Rusted cans, bits of stale food, even an old shirt ripped to shreds. But the weird part? It didn't look like an animal had done it. I wasn't sure why, but it gave me that itch in the back of my mind, like something was off. Later that day, I decided to check out the creek. Figured a little walk by the water would clear my head. The path along the bank was overgrown, like no one had been there in ages. That was the appeal of it, honestly. The untouched wilderness. But about a quarter-mile in, I came across something strange. There was a campsite, or what used to be one. An old tent, collapsed and torn, lay on the ground. Empty cans, a rusty cooking pot, all left behind. It looked like someone had just walked away and abandoned everything. As I got closer, I noticed a large dark stain on the tent fabric. At first, I thought it was dirt, but as I leaned in, the smell hit me. A sharp, metallic stench. Blood. Old, dried blood soaked into the fabric. A normal person might have headed back to their RV and called it quits on the trip, but I was a little too curious for my own good. I found myself poking around. That's when I saw something hanging from a tree branch a few feet off the ground. An old, tattered boot. Just one boot, swaying slightly. It felt staged, like someone had placed it there on purpose, and it unsettled me enough to finally call it a day and head back to my campsite. Back at my RV, I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just an abandoned site from some reckless campers who got in over their heads. Still, the weirdness gnawed at me. I cracked open a beer and sat by the fire, hoping a bit of booze would calm my nerves. That's when I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. Just a flash, like someone darting between the trees. "Hey!" I yelled, not really expecting an answer. Nothing. Silence. A chill crept down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight from my RV and shined it toward the trees. "All right, enough screwing around," I shouted. I half expected some dumb kid to jump out laughing, but there was only quiet. The forest just swallowed the light. Around midnight, I'd managed to drift off to sleep when I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. A sort of dragging noise, low and slow, like someone pulling a heavy sack across the dirt. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. The sound stopped, then started up again, closer this time. I was wide awake now, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. I scrambled for my flashlight, turned it on, and pointed it out the window. I saw him. A man, hunched and dragging something behind him. He was filthy, clothes tattered, hair wild, his face obscured by grime and shadows. He was dragging what looked like a bundle wrapped in old blankets. He stopped, lifted his head toward my RV, and smiled. Not a friendly smile, something cold, calculating. Then he raised a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. And then he kept walking, dragging his bundle toward the creek. I wanted to scream, to yell, but fear clamped down on my throat. I just watched him disappear into the darkness. At sunrise, I was out of the RV, determined to pack up and get the hell out of there. I threw my stuff together and was about to start the engine when I saw something propped up against the RV door. It was an old Polaroid photo, weathered and faded. In the photo was the man I'd seen last night, standing by a campfire with another person, a young woman. She looked terrified. Eyes wide, her face half in shadow. My stomach twisted. Had he been watching me the whole time? Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something made me get out of the RV. I scanned the area, half expecting him to be hiding behind a tree. I spotted the edge of the creek and decided to see if there was anything down there. Part of me hoped I'd find nothing, that I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Instead, I found the bundle he'd been dragging. Partially buried under a pile of leaves and twigs, it was bigger than I thought. I knelt down and with shaking hands, pulled back a corner of the blanket. Inside was what was left of a human body, decomposed beyond recognition. The stench hit me hard and I staggered back, fighting the urge to vomit. I fumbled for my phone, realizing too late that there was no signal out here, no way to call for help. I stood there, heart pounding, when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned. And there he was. The man from the night before, standing just a few feet away, watching me with that same cold smile. "Find something interesting?" he asked, his voice raspy, almost a whisper. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was racing. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself. I took a shaky step back, hoping I could make it to the RV, but he mirrored my movement, stepping forward. "People come out here looking for peace and quiet," he said almost conversationally. "Some never leave." He lunged, a blur of motion. I dodged to the side, stumbling over the uneven ground. He swung something, a heavy stick, maybe a branch, and I felt it graze my shoulder. I scrambled to my feet and bolted toward the RV, adrenaline giving me a speed I didn't know I had. I reached the RV, yanked the door open, and dove inside, slamming it shut just as he reached me. He pounded on the door, yelling, but I locked it. Scrambled to start the engine. The RV roared to life. I hit the gas. The wheels churned in the mud before finally gripping, and I tore out of there, not looking back. I drove for miles, not caring where I was going, just wanting to put as much distance as possible between me and that man. Eventually, I found myself at a ranger station and burst inside, babbling about what I'd seen. They took me seriously enough to call in a search, but when they went back to the site, they found nothing. No bundle, no blood, just an abandoned campsite. I was questioned, of course. I told them everything I could remember. They seemed skeptical, but one of the rangers mentioned that they'd had reports over the years of people disappearing in the area. Most chalked it up to getting lost, but there was always a dark undercurrent to those cases. Rumors of a drifter known to prey on campers. After that day, I never went camping alone again. My name's Jeffrey Walker, and back in 2019, I was RV camping at Glacier National Park in Montana, just looking to escape for a while. I'd been juggling my job and family for as long as I could remember, and the weight of it was finally too much. So I thought, what better place than the Rockies to breathe some fresh air and recharge? I'd taken a month off to clear my head, figured I'd sleep under the stars, fish in crystal clear lakes, and cook over an open flame, just like I'd always wanted to do. I had it all planned out. Every trail I wanted to hike, every fishing spot that promised trout as long as my arm, and a stack of firewood ready for quiet nights by the campfire. I'd driven up in my dad's old RV, the one he passed down to me last year after finally getting himself a newer model. That thing's a tank. A real beast that could go just about anywhere. I felt like a king steering it down the gravel road into the deep woods with no one around for miles. The closest person was probably 20 miles away in the nearest town. That was just how I liked it, alone. Everything was going smoothly for the first couple of days. I fished, and I even managed to finish a couple of books. I was really settling into the quiet. And then one night, things took a turn. I was sitting by the campfire, poking at the embers, half drunk on a bottle of whiskey and humming to myself when I heard footsteps. Heavy ones. Not the kind of rustling you hear from an animal. These were solid, human steps. I went quiet and listened, figuring maybe it was just some hiker who'd lost his way. But then the footsteps stopped. Silence, just beyond the reach of the firelight. "Hello?" I called out, half wishing for an answer, but mostly hoping for none. No response, just the crackle of the fire and the wind moving through the trees. I kept staring into the darkness, feeling like something was definitely off. That's when I caught a faint glint. A reflection, maybe. Something metallic, just beyond the trees. It disappeared almost as soon as I noticed it. Figuring I'd had a little too much to drink, I shook it off and headed inside the RV. I figured if someone was really out there, they'd make themselves known. Besides, I had a pretty decent lock on the door. That night, I slept with one ear open, but nothing else happened. The next morning, though, things got weird. I woke up to find my fire pit scattered, logs tossed around as if someone had stomped through my camp. A half-burnt stick lay right by my door, almost like someone had been waving it around, writing something in the ash. I thought maybe some local prankster had wandered in during the night, but this was way off the beaten path for that. Still, I shrugged it off, cleaned up the mess, and tried to enjoy my breakfast. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd look up from my book and scan the tree line, sure that I'd catch a glimpse of something moving. But every time, nothing. Just my nerves playing tricks. I figured I'd distract myself with a hike, hoping the exercise would clear my head. I must have hiked for hours, taking paths I hadn't planned to, just wandering aimlessly through the trees, feeling the vastness of the place settle over me. When I finally made it back to the RV, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the clearing. And that's when I saw it, scrawled into the dust on my windshield, in letters big enough that they couldn't be mistaken. You shouldn't be here. It stopped me in my tracks. Someone had been here. Someone had gone up to my RV, close enough to leave a message. I looked around. The forest was silent and still. This wasn't funny anymore. I was shaken, no doubt about it. But I figured the best thing to do was play it cool, act like it didn't bother me. People around here probably got their kicks from scaring tourists. I wiped the windshield clean, checked my things, and didn't find anything missing. That night, though, I stayed inside the RV, armed with the heaviest flashlight I could find, just in case. I barely slept. Every little creak, every sigh of the wind had me on edge. Around midnight, I heard scratching, faint at first, then louder, like someone running their fingers down the side of the RV. I froze, flashlight in hand, holding my breath as the sound moved from one end of the RV to the other. Then, silence. By dawn, I was half dead from exhaustion and fear. The scratching didn't come back, but I knew I couldn't stay. As much as I wanted this solitude, something was wrong here. My gut told me to leave. I started packing, throwing my stuff in haphazardly, just wanting to be gone. That's when I noticed something odd. The back tire on the RV was slashed, deep enough that I had no chance of driving on it, and there were footprints leading from the tire to the trees as if someone had been waiting, watching. My heart sank. Then, from somewhere in the woods, I heard laughter. Low, barely audible, but unmistakable. A man's voice, gravelly and rough, echoing through the trees. I called out, demanding to know who was there. Only more laughter in response. It was close, way too close for comfort. Realizing I couldn't stay, I decided to hike out to the main road. I wasn't about to sit around and wait for whoever this was to make their move. I packed my essentials, water, a knife, my flashlight, and locked the RV, hoping it would be safe until I got back. As I hiked, I kept my head down, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. It was late afternoon by the time I got close to the main road. Relief flooded me. I'd made it. But just as I was about to step onto the road, I saw him. A man, tall and wiry, with a filthy jacket and long hair hanging in greasy strands. He stood there blocking the path. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, and he was smiling. He held something in his hand, a knife, long, wickedly sharp, the kind you'd use to skin an animal. He took a step toward me, that grin widening. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice cold and even. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. We stood there, locked in place until he lunged, swinging the knife. I barely dodged, stumbling backward into the underbrush. I grabbed a branch and swung, catching him in the arm. He grunted, but it didn't slow him down. He came at me again, slashing wildly. Desperation took over. I kicked, punched, did anything I could to keep him away. But he was strong. Way stronger than he looked. He laughed, a horrible sound like he was enjoying the fight. I managed to grab his wrist, twisting it until he dropped the knife. For a moment, we were both unarmed. Just two men in the middle of the woods, scrapping like animals. I threw a punch, hitting him square in the jaw, but he barely flinched. His hand shot out, grabbing me by the throat, squeezing until I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, spots dancing in front of my eyes. I clawed at his hand, but his grip was like iron. Then, with a final burst of strength, I jammed my knee into his stomach. He loosened his grip just enough for me to wrench free. I scrambled for the knife. He charged at me again, that same twisted grin on his face. I swung the blade, caught him across the chest. He staggered back, clutching the wound. For a second, I thought he was going to keep coming, but he collapsed, motionless. I didn't wait to check if he was dead. I bolted for the road, not stopping until I flagged down a passing car. Later, I learned his name, Warren Lair, a drifter with a long record of assault and battery. A man suspected in a string of murders across state lines, all in remote camping sites, just like mine. My name is Felix Thompson, and back in 2012, I found myself in the dense forests of Olympic National Park in Washington State. I'd always been a city guy, but after my divorce, I thought some fresh air might do me good. So I packed my gear and headed out for what I hoped would be a peaceful week of hiking and maybe finding myself along the way. I arrived at the park on a crisp Monday morning. The towering evergreens and the scent of pine were a welcome change from the exhaust fumes and blaring horns of Seattle. As I hoisted my backpack, I couldn't help but chuckle at myself. Felix, I thought, a middle-aged man trying to play Bear Grylls. What's next? Wrestling a cougar? Little did I know how ironic that thought would be. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp near a bubbling stream, fumbled with my tent poles like a novice, and eventually got everything in order. That evening, I sat by the fire, roasting a marshmallow on a stick. It burned to a crisp almost instantly. Well, that's one way to cut calories, I muttered, tossing the charred lump aside. The next morning, I decided to hike deeper into the forest. The trail was less worn here, and the sounds of nature grew louder as the noises of other hikers faded away. Birds chirped overhead, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint rush of a waterfall. It felt good to be away from it all. Around midday, I stumbled upon an old cabin, seemingly abandoned. Its wooden frame was covered in moss, and the windows were clouded with grime. Curiosity got the better of me. Maybe I'll find a treasure map, or at least an old bottle of moonshine, I joked to myself. Pushing the creaky door open, I stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light breaking through the cracked walls. An old table sat in the center, covered with yellowed newspapers dating back decades. One headline caught my eye: "Local hunter disappears without a trace." I shuddered but shrugged it off. Probably just got lost. Happens to the best of us, I mused. As I turned to leave, I noticed strange claw marks etched into the wooden door frame. They were deep, and the wood looked freshly gouged. Must be a bear around, I thought. Great, just what I need. That evening, I set up camp a good distance away from the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. I was boiling some water for instant noodles when I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. "Deer, please be a deer," I whispered. Suddenly, a rabbit darted out, scurrying past my campsite. I laughed, relief washing over me. "Jumpier than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs," I said aloud, shaking my head. But the relief was short-lived. Minutes later, the rustling returned, louder this time. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. The beam caught a glimpse of something moving. Something big, too big to be a deer. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response, just the sound of heavy breathing. I remembered the claw marks and felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "So much for a peaceful retreat," I muttered. I decided to keep the fire going all night, adding more wood than necessary. The forest around me grew quiet, unnaturally quiet. Even the crickets had ceased their chirping. Sleep didn't come easy, but exhaustion eventually pulled me under. I awoke to the sound of snapping twigs. The fire had died down to embers, casting eerie shadows around the campsite. Peering out of my tent, I saw nothing at first. Then, on the edge of the clearing, I spotted it. A silhouette, hunched and massive. It moved with a predatory grace, muscles rippling under matted fur. The creature stood on all fours, but its back was arched, and its limbs were disproportionately long, like those of a hyena, but far more robust. Its head turned in my direction, and even without clear light, I felt its gaze lock onto me. My heart pounded in my chest. "Stay calm, Felix," I whispered. "It's just an animal. Maybe it's more scared of you than you are of it." Somehow, I doubted that. I reached slowly for my backpack, remembering the flare gun I'd packed at the last minute. A Christmas gift from my brother, who joked that I'd need it if I ever got lost or wanted to start a party in the woods. The creature began to advance, each step deliberate and silent. As it moved into a sliver of moonlight, I saw its face. An elongated snout like a wolf, but with patches of bare skin revealing raw flesh beneath. Saliva dripped from its jaws, and its ears were torn and ragged. Time to go, I decided. Clutching the flare gun, I burst out of the tent and fired toward the beast. The flare shot out with a hiss, illuminating the clearing in a red glow. The creature recoiled, emitting a low, guttural sound that vibrated in my bones. Without looking back, I sprinted into the trees, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, I heard the creature give chase, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth. "Come on, Felix. Move those legs," I urged myself. In my panic, I tripped over an exposed root, crashing hard onto the ground. Pain shot through my ankle. "Just perfect," I groaned. Crawling forward, I spotted a fallen branch, thick and sturdy. Grabbing it, I struggled to my feet. The creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes reflecting the faint light. It snarled, revealing teeth sharp enough to tear through flesh with ease. "All right, ugly. Let's dance," I said, trying to mask my fear with bravado. It lunged at me, and I swung the branch with all my might, striking its shoulder. It barely flinched. Desperate, I remembered the pocket knife in my cargo pants. Dropping the branch, I fumbled for the knife as the creature circled me. Just then, a loud bang echoed through the forest. "Get down!" a voice shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. Dropping to the ground, I covered my head. A shot rang out, and the creature yelped before retreating into the darkness. I looked up to see a park ranger emerging from the trees, shotgun in hand. "You all right?" he asked, eyes scanning the perimeter. "Do I look all right?" I retorted, but relief flooded through me. "Thanks for the save." He helped me up, noticing my swollen ankle. "Let's get you out of here," he said. "It's not safe." "No kidding," I replied. "What was that thing?" He hesitated. "We don't know. Been getting reports of hikers going missing, finding remains we can't quite explain." "Remains?" I echoed, a chill running down my spine. He nodded grimly. "Best not to talk about it here. Come on." As we made our way back to his cabin, he told me others had seen the creature but lived to tell the tale. "We call it the Shadow Stalker," he said. "Not very original, I know, but it fits." "Shadow Stalker? Sounds like a bad comic book villain," I scoffed. He cracked a smile. "Yeah, well, if it wears a cape and starts monologuing, I'll be sure to let you know." At the cabin, he bandaged my ankle and offered me a cup of strong coffee. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "At first light, we'll get you to the main station and file a report," he said. "But between you and me, not much is being done about it." "Why not?" he sighed. "Budget cuts, bureaucracy, disbelief, you name it. Most folks higher up think it's just wild animal attacks." "That was no ordinary animal," I insisted. "Tell me about it," he replied, staring into his mug. Morning came, and true to his word, the ranger drove me to the main station. On the way, we passed a group of hikers setting off on a trail. "Shouldn't we warn them?" I asked. He shook his head. "Wouldn't do any good. They wouldn't believe us, and we can't close the park without solid evidence." Frustrated, I decided to take matters into my own hands. After ensuring my ankle was sprained but not broken, I hobbled to the local library. If the creature had been around for a while, maybe there were records, legends, anything that could help. Hours of searching yielded little until I stumbled upon an old journal tucked away in the historical archives. It belonged to a trapper named William Hawthorne from the early 1900s. His entries spoke of a beast that walks like a man but hunts like a wolf, terrorizing the area. One passage stood out. "The creature is drawn to those who wander alone, picking them off under the veil of night. Its weakness lies in silver, the metal that mirrors the moon it so craves." "Silver, huh?" I muttered. "Great, because everyone carries silver bullets these days." Just then, an idea struck me. I remembered my late grandfather's antique shop was only a couple of towns over. He left me a box of old trinkets, including a silver letter opener. It wasn't a sword, but it was better than nothing. That evening, armed with the letter opener, tucked into my boot, and a renewed, if reckless sense of purpose, I headed back into the forest. "Third time's the charm," I joked, though my hands were shaking. I made my way to the area where the creature had attacked, leaving markers along the trail to find my way back. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker. Every rustle, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. Finally, in a moonlit clearing, I saw it. The creature was hunched over something. No, someone. A hiker's backpack lay torn beside a motionless body. Anger bubbled up inside me. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping into the open. The creature lifted its head, snarling. Blood stained its jaws. It charged at me with terrifying speed. I waited until the last possible moment before sidestepping, slashing out with the silver letter opener. The blade grazed its side, and the creature howled in pain, stumbling. "So the old man was right," I said, adrenaline coursing through me. It turned to face me again, more furious than before. I knew I had only one shot. As it leaped, I thrust the letter opener forward, aiming for its chest. The impact knocked me backward, the wind leaving my lungs. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the creature let out a guttural cry, staggering before collapsing to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, keeping a safe distance. The creature writhed, its form flickering between beast and something almost human, before finally lying still. Cautiously approaching, I noticed its fur receding, claws retracting. In its place lay a man, middle-aged, with a deep wound where the letter opener had struck. I stared in disbelief. "What are you?" I whispered. Footsteps thundered behind me. The ranger burst into the clearing, shotgun at the ready. He looked from me to the body and sighed heavily. "Well, you did it," he said. "You knew," I accused. "Suspected," he admitted. "But proving a local legend is tricky business." We stood there in silence. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we make sure this doesn't happen again," he replied. In the days that followed, the official report stated that a rogue animal had been responsible for the attack and that it had been put down. The park remained open, the tourists none the wiser. As for me, I returned to Seattle, my quest for peace replaced with a story no one would ever believe. But at least I knew the truth. The creature had once been a man, cursed by forces beyond understanding, doomed to roam the forest in a monstrous form. My name is Sean Walker, and back in 2018, I decided to take a much-needed break in the vast expanse of the Yukon Territory's Kluane National Park. As a freelance photographer, I'd spent years chasing deadlines and cityscapes, and I craved the isolation only the wild could offer. So I packed up my RV and set off, eager for a solitary adventure amid glaciers and mountain peaks. The park was everything I hoped for. Towering mountains capped with snow, turquoise lakes reflecting the sky, and an endless horizon that made me feel both insignificant and profoundly alive. I set up camp near a secluded spot by the Duke River, far from the designated camping areas. It was early June, and the days were long, stretching sunlight well into the evening. On my second day, while hiking along a lesser-known trail, I met a fellow traveler named Mark Hastings. He was in his late 40s, with a rugged beard and a friendly demeanor. We bonded over our shared love for the outdoors and decided to fish together that afternoon. As we cast our lines into the clear river, he shared stories of his travels through Canada's wilderness, each tale more adventurous than the last. "Ever been up to the glaciers?" Mark asked, reeling in a catch. "Not yet," I replied. "Planning to head that way tomorrow. They say the view is unmatched." He nodded. "Be careful up there. Terrain can be tricky and weather changes fast." As evening approached, we parted ways. He was heading back to his campsite a few miles upstream, and we made vague plans to meet again. I returned to my RV, cooked a simple meal, and settled in with a book. The silence of the wilderness was a balm to my urban-weary soul. The next morning, I decided to explore the area near the glaciers as planned. The hike was strenuous but rewarding. The air was crisp, and the landscape shifted from dense forest to rocky inclines dotted with wildflowers. By midday, I reached a vantage point that offered a breathtaking view of the ice fields. While setting up my camera for a panoramic shot, I noticed something unusual through the lens, a flicker of movement far off across the glacier. Zooming in, I saw what looked like a group of people trekking, which was odd given the remoteness of this area. They moved in a staggered line, hauling large backpacks. Curiosity piqued, I decided to get a closer look. As I descended toward the glacier, I stumbled upon a narrow path that seemed to lead in their direction. The trail was marked with fresh footprints and grooves, as if heavy equipment had been dragged through recently. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I brushed it off as overactive imagination. About an hour later, I came across a small makeshift camp tucked into a hollow between ice formations. There were tents camouflaged with white tarps, crates stacked haphazardly, and the faint smell of diesel fuel in the air. Hiding behind a ridge, I observed the scene. Men were unloading containers and carrying them into a crevasse that seemed to open into the glacier itself. Suddenly, a hand clapped on my shoulder. I spun around to face Mark, his expression stern. "What are you doing here?" He whispered harshly. "I could ask you the same," I retorted, confusion mixing with alarm. "You shouldn't be here, Sean. This isn't a place for tourists," he said, his eyes darting nervously back toward the camp. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the camp. A group of men was heading our way, speaking in hushed tones. Mark grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a boulder. "Listen to me carefully," he said urgently. "These people are dangerous. You need to leave now." "Who are they? What's going on?" I demanded. He hesitated before answering. "They're smugglers, trafficking illegal goods across the border using the glacier tunnels." My heart raced. "Are you involved in this?" "No," he insisted. "I'm with the RCMP undercover. I've been tracking them for months." The voices grew louder. Shadows stretched as the men approached. Mark pressed a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the air. A gunshot. We both ducked instinctively. Chaos erupted as the smugglers scattered, shouting orders in a mix of languages. Mark pulled a handgun from under his jacket. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Before we could move, 2 men rounded the boulder, rifles raised. Mark fired swiftly, hitting one in the shoulder. The other lunged at him, and they grappled fiercely. I watched in stunned disbelief as they fought, the smuggler's knife glinting dangerously. Seizing a rock from the ground, I struck the attacker on the back of the head. He crumpled, and Mark pushed him aside. "Thanks," he muttered. "We have to destroy their stash and call for backup." We made our way toward the camp, cautiously. The area was deserted. The smugglers had either fled or were regrouping. Inside one of the tents, we found crates filled with weapons and packets of white powder, drugs meant for distribution. "Help me with this," Mark said, dousing the crates with gasoline from a nearby canister. We set the camp ablaze, flames licking up toward the sky. The smoke would be a signal, but also a beacon for any remaining smugglers. As we retreated, gunfire erupted again. A bullet whizzed past my ear, and we took cover behind an ice wall. "They're not letting us leave easily," I shouted over the noise. Mark radioed for assistance, but the mountainous terrain interfered with the signal. "We need to get to higher ground." We sprinted toward a ridge, bullets striking the ice around us. Reaching a plateau, Mark tried the radio again. This time, he made contact. "Officer down. Need immediate extraction at Glacier Point," he reported. A helicopter's distant rotor became audible, but the smugglers were closing in. One of them caught up, tackling me to the ground. We struggled, his hands tightening around my throat. Spots danced before my eyes as I gasped for air. Mark intervened, pulling him off me and subduing him with a well-placed blow. "Come on, we're almost there." We reached an open area just as the helicopter appeared over the horizon. Relief was short-lived. A group of smugglers stood between us and rescue. Outnumbered and low on options, we prepared to make a stand. "Any jokes up your sleeve?" I quipped nervously. "Not the best time for stand-up comedy," Mark replied grimly. The smugglers advanced, weapons drawn. Suddenly, the helicopter swooped in low, and armed officers rappelled down, engaging the criminals in a swift firefight. Within minutes, the smugglers were apprehended or incapacitated. An officer approached us. "You guys okay?" "Better now," Mark responded. As the scene was secured, I sat on a rock, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Bodies were being loaded onto stretchers, some unconscious, others lifeless. The reality of how close I'd come to death settled heavily. "Looks like you got more adventure than you bargained for," Mark said, sitting tack. "Looks like you got more adventure than you bargained for," Mark said, sitting beside me. "No kidding," I replied. "Next time I want excitement, I'll stick to roller coasters." He chuckled. "Probably safer." Back at the base camp, I was debriefed by authorities. They took my statement and advised me to keep the details confidential due to the ongoing investigation. As evening fell, I finally returned to my RV, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. The following day, I decided to leave the park. The allure of solitude had been overshadowed by the stark dangers I had never imagined. Before departing, I did some research at a local library, curious about the operation I had stumbled upon. I discovered that the smuggling ring had ties to a larger criminal network operating along the Canada-US border. They used remote wilderness areas to move contraband, exploiting the challenging terrain to evade law enforcement. Mark Hastings, whose real name was Agent Marcus Hale, had been instrumental in dismantling several such groups. As I drove away from Glen National Park, the majestic mountains in my rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. The open road ahead seemed both inviting and safe, a welcome contrast to the perilous glaciers. In the end, the adventure I had sought had found me in the most unexpected way. I returned to photography with a renewed appreciation for the mundane. As for Agent Hale, he continued his covert work, blending into landscapes where danger lurked beneath the surface. I've always found solace in the quiet moments between missions, where the world seems to pause just long enough for me to catch my breath. In 2015, I found myself in the heart of Papua New Guinea, a land as enigmatic as it is untamed. My name is Roland McAllister, and after 13 years as a Green Beret, I've seen my fair share of strange things. I've always believed that humor keeps us sane in the face of chaos, so I like to think of myself as the guy who can crack a joke even when the bullets are flying. This time, though, the jungle had other plans. We were a team of 5, sent to extract a high-value target from a remote village rumored to be under the control of a militant group. The air was thick with humidity, and the canopy above was so dense that sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor. The village was days away from any semblance of civilization, which of course made it the perfect spot for trouble. Our team included Jackson, a linguistics expert with a penchant for puns, Lewis, our medic, who could stitch you up while telling you the worst dad jokes, Perez, the tech wizard, who complained more about the lack of Wi-Fi than the swarms of mosquitoes, and Thompson, the quiet sniper who let his shots do the talking. As we moved deeper into the jungle, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Jackson tried to lighten the mood. "You know, if we find Tarzan out here, I'm calling dibs on the first selfie," he quipped. "Sure, and maybe Jane can give you some fashion tips," Lewis retorted, eyeing Jackson's sweat-soaked bandana. By the third day, the jokes had dwindled. The jungle seemed to close in around us, each rustle and distant call adding to our unease. We came across the remains of what appeared to be a campsite. Tents were shredded, supplies scattered, but there were no signs of the occupants. "Looks like someone had a wild party and forgot to invite us," Perez said, attempting to mask his discomfort. Thompson knelt beside a torn backpack. "No bullet holes," he observed. "This wasn't an attack by militants." "Maybe a wild animal," I suggested, though I knew no animal native to this region would cause such destruction without leaving a trace of its presence. As night fell, we set up our own camp, posting watches in shifts. The jungle's nocturnal symphony was both mesmerizing and unsettling. Around midnight, during my watch, I heard it, a distant, eerie howl that sent a chill down my spine. "Probably just a howler monkey auditioning for American Idol," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the creeping dread. The next morning, we pressed on. The trail ahead was littered with broken branches and disturbed foliage, as if something large had barreled through. We found more signs, deep gashes on tree trunks, footprints that didn't match any animal in our field guides. "Anyone else feel like we're in an episode of Unsolved Mysteries?" Jackson asked nervously. "Relax. Maybe Bigfoot decided to go on vacation," Lewis replied, forcing a chuckle. By late afternoon, we reached the village, or what was left of it. Huts were demolished, debris scattered everywhere, and then we saw them, the bodies. Villagers lay strewn about, their faces frozen in terror, limbs twisted unnaturally. Lewis knelt beside one of them. "These wounds, "I've never seen anything like this," he said quietly. Perez's face turned pale. "This wasn't done by any weapon or animal I know." Thompson scanned the perimeter, his grip tightening on his rifle. "We need to get out of here, now." Before we could react, a deafening roar echoed through the village. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything we'd ever seen. It stood on two legs, towering over us at nearly 8 feet tall, with a muscular build covered in coarse, dark fur. Its face resembled that of a hyena, but with elongated jaws revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Well, there goes my plan for a peaceful retirement," I said under my breath. The creature lunged at us with astonishing speed. We scattered, each of us firing our weapons. Bullets seemed to slow it down, but they didn't stop it. It swiped at Perez, its massive claw catching him across the chest. He fell back, blood staining his uniform. "Lewis, get to Perez!" I shouted. Lewis rushed to Perez's side while Jackson and I provided cover fire. Thompson took aim from a distance, firing precise shots at the creature's head. One of his bullets grazed its eye, causing it to howl in pain. "Nice shot!" Jackson yelled. "Don't celebrate just yet," Thompson warned. "It's still standing." The creature turned its gaze toward Thompson and charged. Thompson tried to retreat, but the creature was too fast. It knocked him to the ground, claws tearing into him. Before we could intervene, "Thompson!" I screamed, emptying my magazine into the beast. It recoiled, giving us a moment to reach Thompson. But it was too late. He was gone. "We need to fall back," I ordered. We grabbed what we could and made a run for the tree line. The creature was wounded but relentless, crashing through the underbrush behind us. "Anyone got any bright ideas?" Jackson panted. "Keep moving. Head for the river," I replied. We broke through the foliage to find a steep drop leading down to a fast-flowing river below. "Great. Just great," Perez groaned, clutching his injured chest. "Looks like we're between a rock and a wet place," Lewis said, attempting humor despite the dire situation. The creature burst into the clearing, its eyes fixed on us. Without hesitation, I made a decision. "Jump!" I yelled. We leaped off the edge, plunging into the cold water below. The current was strong, pulling us downstream. I surfaced, gasping for air, and saw the creature pacing along the riverbank, unwilling or unable to follow. "Everyone okay?" I called out. "Define okay," Jackson coughed. We managed to reach a calmer part of the river and pulled ourselves onto the bank. Perez's condition was worsening. The gashes were deep, and he was losing blood fast. "Lewis, how bad is it?" I asked. Lewis shook his head grimly. "I need to stop the bleeding, but without proper equipment." Perez looked up at us weakly. "Don't worry about me. Just make sure you guys get out of here." "Cut the hero talk," I snapped. "We're not leaving anyone behind." We set up a makeshift camp to tend to Perez. As night fell, the sounds of the jungle returned, but they felt different, more ominous. "You think that thing will come after us?" Jackson asked. "I don't plan on sticking around to find out," I replied. "At first light, we move." The night was restless. Every crackle and rustle put us on edge. Around midnight, Lewis nudged me awake. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained to listen. The jungle was eerily quiet, too quiet. Then a low rumbling sound echoed from somewhere nearby. "Looks like our friend didn't take the hint," I said. We roused Jackson and prepared to move. Perez was barely conscious, but we couldn't stay. As we gathered our gear, the creature emerged from the darkness, its eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. "You've got to be kidding me," Jackson muttered. We opened fire, but our ammo was running low. The creature seemed more cautious this time, circling us, looking for an opening. "Split up," I ordered. "It can't follow all of us." "That's the worst idea I've ever heard," Jackson protested. "Got any better ones?" No one did. We scattered into the jungle, hoping to confuse it. I could hear the creature crashing through the foliage, but it was hard to tell who it was following. I ran until my lungs burned, then took cover behind a massive tree. The sounds of pursuit had faded. As I caught my breath, a thought occurred to me. If we couldn't kill it, maybe we could trap it. I reached for my radio. "Jackson, Lewis, Come in. Static. Anyone copy? Finally, Lewis's voice crackled through. I'm here. Jackson's with me. Listen, we need to regroup. I have an idea. We rendezvoused at a rocky outcrop I had spotted earlier, a narrow passage leading into a small cave. If we can lure it in here, we might be able to trap it, I explained. And how do you propose we do that? Jackson asked skeptically. Bait, I said, glancing at the bloody bandages on Perez's wounds. You're not suggesting, Lewis began. No, not Perez, I assured him, but we can use some of his bandages to leave a scent trail. We set the plan in motion, laying out strips of bloodied cloth leading into the cave. We positioned ourselves above the entrance, ready to seal it once the creature was inside. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. Then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of the creature approaching. It sniffed the air, following the trail just as we'd hoped. Get ready, I whispered. The creature entered the cave, its massive form disappearing into the darkness. As soon as it was inside, we pushed a large boulder we'd loosened earlier, sending it crashing down to block the entrance. A furious roar erupted from within, but the creature was trapped. That won't hold it forever, Lewis warned. It doesn't have to, I replied. Just long enough for us to get to extraction. We hurried back to Perez, who was fading fast. With our combined effort, we carried him through the jungle, moving as quickly as we could toward our extraction point. By dawn, we reached a clearing where a helicopter was scheduled to pick us up. As we waited, the distant sound of the creature's enraged howls echoed through the trees. Think it'll break free? Jackson asked. Probably, I admitted, but with any luck, we'll be long gone. The helicopter arrived and we loaded Perez aboard. As we lifted off, I looked back at the vast expanse of jungle below. Next time, let's pick a vacation spot with room service, Jackson suggested. Agreed, I chuckled. I hear Antarctica is lovely this time of year. Lewis shook his head. You two are hopeless. As we flew away, the creature's roars faded into the distance. We had survived, but the mystery remained. Back at base, we briefed our superiors. They listened with skeptical expressions. So, you're telling me a giant hyena man attacked your team? The colonel asked incredulously. With all due respect, sir, I'd rather not make a habit of telling that story, I replied. He sighed. We'll look into it. In the meantime, get some rest. As we left the office, Jackson nudged me. You think they'll actually do anything about it? I smirked. Knowing bureaucracy, they'll probably send a strongly worded letter. Well, at least we made it out in one piece, Lewis said. Mostly, I corrected, glancing at Perez, who was recovering in the infirmary. Hey, look on the bright side, Jackson said. We just discovered a new species. Maybe they'll name it after us. Yeah, Nightmaris Maximus, I laughed. Sounds like a lousy theme park ride. Lewis added, more like a death trap. We walked down the corridor, the weight of the ordeal starting to lift. Despite everything, humor had seen us through. Later that evening, as we sat in the mess hall, Jackson raised his glass. To Thompson, he said solemnly. We all raised our glasses. A moment of silence passed before Jackson spoke again. You know, he'd probably be mad if we got all mushy. He always said he'd haunt us if we got sappy. I chuckled. Well, last thing I need is a sarcastic ghost following me around. Especially one with better aim than you, Lewis teased. Watch it, or I'll swap your sugar with salt again, I retorted. We spent the rest of the evening sharing stories, the camaraderie easing the lingering tension. In the days that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Missions came and went, each with its own challenges. But every so often, I'd catch myself glancing toward the horizon, wondering about the creature still lurking in that jungle. One morning, as I was heading to a briefing, Jackson caught up with me. Hey, rumor has it they've sent a research team to Papua New Guinea, he said. Is that so? I replied. Yeah, guess they're keen on meeting our furry friend. I shrugged. Better them than us. Think they'll find it? I thought for a moment. If they're lucky, they won't. he nodded thoughtfully. By the way, I've been meaning to ask, what did you write in your report about the creature? I kept it simple. Described it as an unidentified hostile entity resembling a hyena on steroids. Jackson laughed. You always did have a way with words. Comes with the territory. As we entered the briefing room, I couldn't help but smirk. Despite the insanity of that mission, we were still standing, ready to face whatever came next. And if that creature ever decided to pay us a visit, well, we'd be sure to roll out the red carpet. Preferably one lined with tripwires and claymores. After all, in this line of work, you have to be prepared for anything. And sometimes the best way to face the unknown is with a loaded rifle and a well-timed joke.